All right, it's time for some stories. It's story time with Uncle Bucky. Tonight I'm going to do another one of mine. In the 1980s, I was writing a lot of short stories for fantasy, science fiction, horror magazines, and mostly doing artwork, but also writing. And this is one of them called Worms on the Brain. It was originally published in a magazine called The Tome, Volume 2, 1989, with the Grub Street Publications, and then again in Virgin Meat 10, 1990. I'm dedicating this one to my number one fan, Angie Jeffries. So, this one's to you. Thank you for your tips and all of the correspondence that we do. So here we go. Worms on the Brain. Welcome to your new home, folks, Mr. Perkins, a dry, informal landlord stated as he let the elderly tenants in through the rickety front door. It was a welcome that sounded sincere, a bit patronizing, but sincere. "It isn't our home, we're just renting," Homer groused in his usual sardonic tone, "and it smells like dirt in here." "Don't you start," his wife Irma said, displaying a sharp eye. Homer reluctantly responded to her warning, but managed to mumble, "I mean it, dirt." Mr. Perkins ran his finger across the windowsill and held it up toward them. "Clean as a whistle," he said. "The tenants here before you kept it up just fine. Despite their faults, they were clean." "It's fine, Mr. Perkins," Irma replied with a weak smile. "Looks like whoever lived here before moved out in a hurry, though some of this furniture looks rather valuable." "Well, to be honest with you folks," Perkins explained, "they were crooks, the man and his wife. You would have never known it by looking at them. Sweet couple at first glance from West Virginia, if I remember rightly. The furniture was probably stolen or bought with stolen money, but the local police have no proof of that. So now it's mine. Or rather yours, now that you're renting." "It's nice," Homer mumbled, "for crook furniture. Armed robbers they were. First Nation Bank on the corner of Parker and Elm in town. Thousands of dollars." "Oh, goodness. So they're in jail then?" Irma questioned. "No, ma'am. After they stashed the loot, seems that the fellow got greedy or jealous and killed his wife or something like that. It wasn't here, though. It was in town late one night after they had been drinking at a hotel lounge. It's been a while now. He got caught right away. Died in prison the first week he was there by the girl's cousin. So I guess they never got to spend their stolen loot. Shame. Serves him right, I suppose. Wasn't a cordial man to begin with. He was facing life for previous crimes with the chair at the end of the road for the murder of his poor wife," he said grimly. "But enough of that. I don't want you folks getting the feeling that this place is haunted or any such nonsense." "Smells like dirt in here," Homer repeated with more vigor. "And worms." "Pay him no mind, Mr. Perkins," Irma apologized. "Homer's not been the same, well, since the disease." Perkins nodded blankly, choosing politeness over curiosity. "Well," he said, "you've paid your first month's rent, but I still need your security deposit, and then I'll be on my way until next month. That's $450, right?" Irma opened up her ratty purse with arthritic hands, retrieving a small roll of cash wrapped with a fat rubber band. Reluctantly, she held it out toward him, trying to smile and be thankful for the transaction, but her weary eyes revealed her true anxiety. "It's all here," she said to him, "every single penny that they had." "Irma," Homer called from across the room, pointing at the floor near her feet. "I just saw one. Right then. I saw the little devil stick its pointed flat head right up out of the carpet, red as a beet, just like they did back into the apartment." "Stop it, Homer. You know better." "Looked right at me, Irma. Right at me. Damn it, we can't stay here. The worms are here, too. Place is infested with them." Mr. Perkins was surveying the floor with a puzzled look on his face. If that's all, Mr. Perkins, Irma interjected, we'd like to head on to bed now. Homer's tired. The rest of the furniture will be here in the morning, and we need to get our rest. I understand, he said, again with a slightly demeaning, patronizing tone that the middle-aged enjoyed speaking to the elderly. He pocketed the money, and within a few short minutes, he was gone. Irma hobbled across the living room and eased into a dusty old antique armchair in the corner. It smelled like old, wet newspapers and damp basement walls. She glanced at the thin, worn carpet and the torn, shabby curtains, and she put her face into her hands and began to cry. Homer kept his vigil, crawling around the small house on his hands and knees, sniffing at the floor like a crazed bloodhound, rubbing his palms and gnarled knuckles across the threadbare carpet as if smoothing out lumps. Irma could hear him whispering angrily to himself about the cost of an exterminator. You realize, don't you, that we're stone cold broke? We can't afford the gas and electric or even to have the water turned on, Homer. She watched him circle the room for some time, perhaps 5 entire laps. Her eyes were red from crying, and her voice was weak and shaky. Not even enough for a decent dinner tonight. Homer did not acknowledge her. He was too busy, hunting and hammering lightly on the floor with his fist whenever he spotted a worm moving along, making its burrow beneath the carpet. There's a knot of the leathery bastards right here, wiggling and squiggling, he mumbled, pressing the flat beneath the dry-wadded weave with all of his strength. Damn you, Homer, she hissed at him as she rose for bed. Her legs and hips ached horribly. I thought we had left the worms behind. Each morning, Irma woke to the sound of her husband crawling about the house, cursing at the worm nests under the carpet. And each night she went to bed the same way. At least his mad obsession made him oblivious to the squalor and day-to-day suffering and misery that Irma was subjected to endure. They could not afford a telephone on their welfare checks. And even if they could, all their friends and family were dead or gone, so there was no one for them to call for help or for company. On rent day, the first of the month, the meager welfare money was gone, and Irma knew that Mr. Perkins would soon be by for his due. She went to the refrigerator, a nervous ulcer burning in her empty belly, and opened the door. A waft of soured milk washed it past. The light bulb flickered and went out. Inside was mostly empty cartons of moldy tubs with bits and pieces of leftovers from the past month's slim pickings. She found half a stick of crumb-covered butter and some onion skins, and having no other choice, she ate them. Irma, come look, a whole heap of them in the corner here, Irma cried out from down the hall almost excitedly. Irma's spotted hands were trembling. She tried hard to keep control of her senses. Her stomach growled, and just then, in her delirium, her eyes began playing tricks on her. The room's light seemed to grow dimmer, as though a cloud had just passed before the sun. Then, out of the corner of her eye, Irma noticed movement close to the floor, a slight writhing wiggle. Startled by it, she quickly turned to focus on it, and there, by God, was one of Homer's blessed worms, a long, slick, reddish-brown creature protruding up from a hole in the weave, dancing serpent-like. It was exactly as Homer had always described them to her over the years. At least 1.5 feet long, flat rather than cylindrical, and pointed at the foremost tip. It seemed to be watching her as she stared at it. Then, in an instant, it disappeared when she blinked her eyes. An illusion, she thought, shaking. She was covered with a cold sweat. She was afraid she was about to faint. There's some more back here by the bookcase, Homer called. Irma's face grew red, from her neck up to her wilted cheeks. He never tired, ever. He was diligent on his idiotic quest, and now his madness was becoming her own. Call the exterminator, Emma. God damn it! Let's get rid of these goddamn worms once and for all. Irma stood suddenly, her chair crashing behind her, and without thinking, she seized the dull butcher knife from the drain board and walked briskly through the dining room. She saw him as she stormed around the corner, kneeling as always, the bones of his spine running a singular lumpy trail down the back of his yellow t-shirt from his baggy stained shorts to his scraggly sun-spotted scalp. Gotcha, he piped, smacking the carpet with a rusty spatula, stirring up a small cloud of dust. Ah, shit, missed again. Irma screamed in furious frustration and fell to her knees at his side, burying the knife into the floor with all her feeble might. If there's worms under this carpet, she shrieked madly, I'll eat 'em! I swear I'll eat 'em! Enraged to the point of recklessness, she shredded the dry, rotted weave with the knife over and over again, ripping and tearing at it ferociously with her left hand, filling the room with choking dust. See, Homer, she cried, coughing. See? No worms! There ain't no worms under here! No worms! There's no worms! None! See? See? Homer had risen to his rug-shaped knees, staring wide-eyed at the antics of his crazed wife. How about over there? Irma pulled at the carpet, staples popping like kernels of corn in a microwave, until her hands bled. Nothing, you insane bastard, she wailed. Now, for God's sakes, please shut up about the goddamn worms. Do you understand me, Homer? I mean, forever. There's no worms. No, he said plainly and matter-of-factly, but there's money. It wasn't until she noticed the bills floating around the room, wreathed in the dust cloud, that Homer's statement finally registered in her ringing ears. They were mostly 20s and 50s, but there was noticeably many $100 bills mingled in with them. She stopped and stared, unable to draw a breath. You're right, though, Irma, you surely are, Homer admitted, pushing his way to a stand. He kicked at a pile of shredded carpet. There ain't no worms under there, I can see that now. There surely ain't a one. Irma was holding up 2 fistfuls of $100 bills, eyes as round as sugar donuts. I, she could only say. There was a knock on the door. She dropped the cash, turning to see the familiar silhouette of Perkins through the dining room curtain, twitching impatiently on the front porch stoop. Who's there? She dallied. I think it's Perk. Shh! She hissed at her husband. Bill Perkins, he answered, trying to peer in through the cracked window. Today's the first. Rent's due. That's $450. Irma looked to Homer for any advice or direction or help, but he seemed to be oblivious, more interested with something on the ceiling. Fine, she stuttered, fumbling nervously with her purse. She looked inside, even though she knew that it was empty. Everything okay in there? Perkins called, jiggling the door handle. Irma swallowed nervously. She stooped and seized a handful of cash from the floor and stuffed it into her purse. She gathered her wits as best she could, primped at her ratted hair for a few seconds, and strutted towards the door as if she were leaving for a Sunday stroll. She cracked the door open no more than 3 inches, filling the gap with her face and body so that the nosy landlord could not see beyond. And he was certainly trying. Do you have change? She asked as pleasantly as she was able. You don't look very well. I am a peach, she responded abruptly and displayed the sharp eye, usually reserved for her twit of a husband. They stood there for a moment, eye to eye. Yes, he finally succumbed. I have change. Here's $500, she said, pulling her hand from her purse and through the narrow opening at the door jamb. Perkins' brow was taut. I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm a little surprised you have your rent today. I was worried you couldn't pay. We can be resourceful if need be, Mr. Perkins, she chided, trying not to cough from a cloud of incapacitating dust. And speaking of money, Mr. Perkins, she asked, about those two who lived here before us. The bank robbers? Fascinating story, she chimed. How much money did they get away with exactly? Bank said $200,000, but there's no telling, really, he replied, pocketing his cash. They were gamblers, the two of them, probably lost every nickel of it. Shame, she said. They loved up Jackson after they left here, probably took it with them. Never found a single dollar bill around this property, and believe me, we searched every inch. Well, that's too bad, Irma said. It really is. Money like that don't come around to deserving folk very often. Surely don't, Irma, Mr. Perkins said, his shoes clunking down the front porch steps. He opened his car door, stopped in, and called to her just before she closed the door. Hey, Irma! Yes, Mr. Perkins. If you find that treasure, you'd be sure and call the authorities now, wouldn't you? You'd call me. Well, just kidding, he laughed. Have a good day now. See the first of next month. Tell Homer I said hey. Irma was smiling ear to ear as she watched his car pull away. She spun as gaily as a schoolgirl, eyeing the treasure strewn about the disarrayed floor. No more ice-cold nights. No more ragged clothes. No more going hungry ever again. Life was going to change for them. We're rich, Homer, she said. My prayers have been answered. We are rich. All of our problems are finally over. Homer was preoccupied right then, laying up, ear against the wall, listening intently. He nodded at her. Good. We can afford an exterminator then, he replied crossly. I think these walls are infested with snakes. The end.